What I don't want you guys to do is do the jiu-jitsu technique. So here, they're carrying my entire body weight, right? They're absorbing my entire body weight. They're using a lot of energy just to keep this position stable. If I do anything jiu-jitsu related, like chair sit, now obviously I have their back, I'm closer to the submission, but they're not carrying my weight. If anything, I'm carrying their weight. I'm gonna be fatiguing my legs to control the body triangle. If they're good at defense, their hands are free to hand fight here. So we're having a hand fighting battle, as opposed to our positioning here, where their hands are preoccupied by trying to hold themselves up. They're absorbing my entire body weight. For me to jump hooks and take the back would be actually a gift to them. I'm closer to the submission, but again, now they're in a position where they can hand fight, and we're going to use energy to keep the position. Here, it's just my body weight on top here. I'm just driving off my toes, pushing in. For them to keep the status quo, they're going to be wasting energy. So just that extra detail I want you guys to take. When we get here, get your chest low, drive weight forward, put weight forward into them here. I'm back heeling with my left leg. They're framing on this hand. Use your elbow to clear it. Now when they try to frame on the hand.
What do we mean? What do we mean when we say shin trap, shin pinning, leg riding, power riding? I think Craig Jones says it best here. So when we're talking about pinning our opponent's legs, well, we're looking at our next masterclass here on YouTube. We're looking at pinning our opponent's legs and spreading them. So we want to separate the legs together as far apart as possible, contorting our opponent's body. So notice how here we have Craig pinning our opponent. His right hip is pinned to the floor where his shoulders are flat. So now what Craig is talking about is keeping the shoulders flat. So if we're pinning the left hip or the right hip, we're going to work on a diagonal axis. So if we're pinning the right hip over that side, then we have to pin the left shoulder. So let's hear him talk about that right now.
Body. It's going to cause discomfort. And again, we don't need to just go like crazy and try to snap their spine here, right? We can use it to gently build pressure, leading to discomfort. They're going to seek to relieve discomfort, right?
So what is the purpose of the shin pin, shin trap? The purpose is to work less, right? So we want to work less here. So the purpose and the whole goal of jiu-jitsu, let's just say, is to make the other opponent as uncomfortable as possible, and as we are doing it, as comfortable as possible. So doing more with and while doing less. So while we want to pin and trap their legs and work to a dominant position, shin trap, shin pin, it works because we want our opponent to carry our weight, make them as uncomfortable as possible. We want them to marinate in the discomfort. We want them to chip away at their spirits until they give us what we want, or we can guide them to the direction that we want. We don't want to have to, that's how we can fight a younger, explosive opponent. We sag them down, we drain their energy, we take the life force out of them as we work and pin their legs, pin their upper body. We want them to carry weight to make them work harder. So the purpose of this series, the shin trap, shin pin, power ride, leg ride, however you want to call it, is to create more discomfort for our opponent while doing less on our side and pinning them at the same time.
Some of the concepts today will be quite different, but again, it's going to be built on the presumption that the guy you're on top of wants to get up. He wins the positional sparring game if he can stand up. Most people don't realize that they don't know how to hold someone down because no one they've ever trained with has ever really tried to get back up. So we'll try and change the hierarchy of positions, especially for the top player, right, the top guy. Obviously, our goal would be to submit them, so ultimately we would like to get them to a position where we have their back, not just two hooks, but potentially flattened out in some aspect. That would be the top of the hierarchy. Whereas traditional jiu-jitsu might be two hooks and we sit back to our butt and they're on top of us, hand fighting against the choke. So we're gonna have to switch some of the hierarchy.
Now the next question is, how are we going to get to these hierarchies of different positions, and what are the points of control? When we look at it from a standpoint of the human body, The points of control are going to work diagonally. So if we look at the left hip, or in this instance here, when you're looking at the video, on the right hand side of the hip versus the left hand side of the shoulder, when we look at these diagonal points of control, this will help control our opponent much better, much better. If we maintain the position of the left hip, then we know the opponent's right shoulder is going to have to give, right? So when we compare things like this, the more diagonal points of access we can maintain, the better. And vice versa. If we do the left hip, we have to control the right shoulder. Now, it's not universally true in the sense where it has to be the shoulder. It could be the right elbow, the right wrist. It could be the right leg. So if we were to look at this example here, if we control the right hip here, we can control the left knee, we can control the left leg, we can control the left shoulder, we can control the left arm or elbow. It just has to be a diagonal point of control. When we look at and pay attention to these things and you start to think about it, when we have a back control, when we have turtle positions, when we have different different forms of maintaining the dominant positions, it's all some variation of this.
Of left-right control. If I'm behind someone, it is absolutely critical that I have the ability to control their movement left and right. Okay? So often I see athletes control one side of the body, the right side or the left side, but not the other. And as a result, it's relatively simple for your opponent to go out and start escaping. Let's start with some preliminary ideas here. The idea that when I work behind my training partner, I will have one arm underneath my opponent's arm and one arm going over the shoulder like so. Okay. The danger here is that, of course, my opponent can start turning inside my arms, and when I have my hooks in, I'll be demonstrating that shortly, they can start turning inside my legs. Okay. We can never have an opponent who's able to turn, because ultimately a turn will create a situation where I'm no longer on my opponent's back and he can fully turn into me. Okay, so preventing our opponent from turning left and right is a critical element, because if that turn should be sustained, ultimately they'll turn into me and I will no longer be on their back. Okay, so this ability to shut down turning movements left and right is absolutely critical. Okay. Once we get behind someone, okay, we have a control hand going underneath and an arm over the top. You'll see that if I use my left hand as a control hand, this will prevent my opponent from turning to the right. As he goes to turn to the right, my elbow behind his body restrains him. However, it does absolutely nothing to stop my opponent turning in the other direction. So that would be the direction of his escape. Okay, I have two arms here in front of my training partner. It's absolutely critical that I use the elbow on one side in front of his shoulder as an impediment to movement. I can have my hands locked in this position, or I can have them open. But one thing doesn't change: my elbow positions. I have an elbow behind him on one side and an elbow in front of the shoulder on the other. A very important concept here is the concept of diagonal control. We've seen that if our opponent can turn a sufficient distance, he can turn into us and actually get us off the back position. Okay. If I have my left hand controlling his upper body movement, that will make it very difficult for my opponent to turn in this direction, as we saw previously. If I have my hook on the same side and only one hook, now it's very difficult for my opponent to turn to the right. There's both a hook and a hand controlling him, but it's absurdly easy for him to turn this way and turn into me and eventually escape the back control. It is absolutely critical that if we have one hand on our opponent and one hook in, they be on opposite sides. If I have my right hook in and my opponent goes to turn left, it's my right hook that makes it difficult for him. When he goes to turn to the right, it's my left hand that holds him in place. This is the principle of diagonal control. Again, if I have only one hook and one upper body grip, they must be on opposite sides of the body, so that movement both left and right is constrained. This is what we call diagonal control.
Now that we saw an example from Danaher about this control, this diagonal axis of control, let's look at how Craig Jones and actually comes out from the UFC and many other UFC fighters apply this same principle to controlling the body. So in the next up, what we're going to look at is Craig Jones utilizing the control of the knee, and then from there crisscrossing and controlling the opposite shoulder, opposite arm.
Down. If we have that one-on-one and they do turn to turtle, I want to reinforce it on the far side. If you look at my leg position here, I'm going to pinch and cover the hips. I'm going to place my knee on the ground next to their knee, and I'm going to sag my entire body weight to get them to a hip here. I roll weight forward onto them here, and I want to place my knee inside. So if I try to place a hook here and they keep this space tight, keep your elbow tight, it's going to be tough. But there's always space for me to force my knee in first and then flare that backwards here. Now when they try to clear the grip or turn to turtle, they're carrying all of our weight here. So this basically for me, this position would be the top of the hierarchy because we still have diagonal control. I'm controlling this hip and the far shoulder, and I have reinforced grips here. So this is ultimately the position we want to get to, and I want you as a defensive guy to feel out trying to strip this grip and trying to turn to turtle. So if they're trying to move here, a far superior position in terms of holding people down for the goal we have here, which is to pin them, to keep them to the ground. It basically, I'm trying to control their movement here. So depending on what they're trying to do, sometimes we would pinch. Ultimately, I can even place that knee on the ground and sit back on this hip. I just want something applying pressure this way. So now when they try to turtle, they can't. If they go to turtle now, that hip goes over the top of the other one. So anything we can do to keep this pressure flared back.
Kamzat versus Lee in the UFC. And notice how when Kamzat does the leg riding, leg pinning, shin riding, whichever word you want to call it, notice how he right away hooks onto the opponent's leg. He hooks onto Lee's legs right here. And he's maintaining a downward pressure, forcing him to contort the upper body. Now pay attention to Kamzat's left knee. His left knee is blocking his opponent's leg from moving the entire time. So this pins and traps the opponent in. Look at that. So his left leg is in control the entire time. And notice right away, he's back in the same position Craig Jones was talking about. So notice how he's controlling Lee's left hip, and he has the right arm on the control right here. He's constantly hitting him with the, because we're in MMA here, but you can see that he's constantly throwing his body weight into the front upper right quadrant, forcing him on turtle the entire time. So once he gets into turtle, the left knee that's in front of Lee the entire time right here, if you look at Kamzat's left knee, this is the basis of the entire system if you want to look at it.
Pinch and cover the hips. I'm going to place my knee on the ground next to their knee.
You want to look at it. The left knee in front and the right knee behind is the trap, is the beginning of this whole system of making our opponent carry our body weight from the back, from the turtle position. Now, one thing I really wanted to point out is the right knee behind the butt, right on top of the shin or behind the knee pit, if you want to call it. If I zoom in right here, the right knee, that is very, very important. And one of the reasons why that's very important is because if our opponent if Lee turns to his left, and he turns to his left, we can see that right away. That gives us the perfect option to go leg riding again. So Kamzat could throw his left knee on top of the leg and then ride it from there. If the Lee turns away from us, it gives us the leg drag. And if he stands up, it gives us, again, like you saw, the hook. So if he stands up from here, which our opponent here, because we're in UFC here in MMA, our opponent's going to want to naturally
Stand up. So when we're looking at it from this perspective, our opponent is constantly being driven down. He's going to have his legs controlled the entire time. There's a crisscross diagonal position of axis of control. And it's really forcing our opponents. And at this point, this level of control is great, not just for grappling and BJJ, but also MMA. I just want you to pay attention to the level of control Kamzat has on Lee here. And if you pay attention, he's doing the same moves that Craig Jones has taught us. He's hooking the legs. He's keeping that knee at the hip level. He's using the knee to control the knee. He's using the knee to control the hip. Whenever the opponent's standing up, he's interchanging and throwing in the hook, controlling that far side hip. He's also forcing the opponent down. So just pay attention to what he's doing here. When we start looking at the major players in the industry and we're looking at how they're adapting, you can see they use some variation of contorting the upper body compared to the lower body, just as we said, in the diagonal axis of position. And you can see here Gordon grabs also the same thing. Dagestani handcuffs, controls the far opposite hip. And you can see that there's an upward progression in terms of how he's doing it. So instead of him staying in this position, though, he uses this to climb into your traditional hierarchy of positions like Craig was talking about. He prefers mount. He prefers these dominant positions as well. But it suffice to say, these points in time where we're making our opponents suffer all come into play. It's slowly chipping away at our opponent's energies as we're progressing and doing less while doing more.
So we want to be riding these legs. If I'm in a leg drag here, I don't want to score points and pass. I want to maintain control. Control is at the legs. So we can start splitting the legs and stapling over the top. Don't be afraid if they start pushing your legs and squaring back up. So let's pushing. Stay on the legs at all times. We can reinforce it. Even one's good enough. I find this superior to regular side control. Tyler's trying to move because my weight's oriented against his strongest positions here.
Throughout the entire process is here. You're going to see that Craig Jones, instead of having a simple hook here, he's forcing the opponent to carry both his legs and his body weight.
If I take a hook here, you can knee slide out. Knee slide this way. Exactly, yeah. If I stand on it, and now we're back to our same position. Yeah, your hips can float in between. I want to ride, so if you do the same thing, if you do that same movement, yeah, we can post this leg wide. If they try, I'm driving this direction now, right? That's actually going to help them turtle. So if you go the other way now, I have to now react to that. So I have to be ready to push and pull.
Of the bottom player's feet touching the floor. So again, one more time, Tyler's on his back. He can bridge if his feet are on the floor. He can hip escape if his feet are on the floor. If he tries those movements without his feet, he has no power at all. So I want you to think about that throughout. When we talk about controlling the bottom grappling, it's going to all involve preventing these feet being on the floor.
I'm here, they turn up to a turtle. I would ride the hips. Yeah. And then pin my knee. So now try to turtle again. It slows that turtle greatly, yeah. Because there's so much weight on the hips. I don't want them to have high hips. We want to prevent the high hips. So if we're here and here, if they do manage to turtle, just don't, so as you turtle, don't come forward. Okay. Go back again. I want you to keep the sprawl going. So as they turtle,
Okay, readjust the constraint.
yeah, now they're probably going to want to turn back into me a little because it relieves pressure. So if you do turtle,
Yeah, it's kind of stretch them out.
yeah, create that opening pressure.
Let's review the system. So first of all, the very first jab, the very first setup, the very first display of this would be the knee block that's in front of our opponent in turtle. So our knee has to block their knee, whether it's in front or on top of their thighs, doesn't matter. As long as our knee is there to set the block. Our right leg should be behind the kneecap, should be there to control the leg for us to start the shin riding, leg riding, shin pinning, shin clamping, leg clamping, however way you want to call it. Next up from there, we need to control a diagonal point of access. So we need a diagonal control. We need to either control the far hip, far shoulder, far arm, far knee, or far leg. This way we can create this diagonal pressure and we can generate that torque and pressure into our opponent. The longer we can keep our opponents in this position, the more uncomfortable they will be. From there, we can set and move our way up to a dominant position of control, like traditional jiu-jitsu, where it comes to side control, maybe mount, back control, back mount, whichever. But if you want to chip away your opponent, we would stay in these positions for longer, and we eventually let them open up these submissions or positions themselves. And that's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. I know you're going to love the other stuff I have. There's other masterclasses and other breakdowns in this channel. And please like, comment, subscribe. This is my bread and butter. And if there's any other videos or anything you want me to do a breakdown on or the next study, leave your comments below.